I never thought silence could weigh so heavily, like fog pressing into your skin. The house sat on the edge of a dried-up field, barely held together by time, and something else I couldn't quite name. From the moment I stepped onto the creaking front porch, I felt like I was being watched. But it wasn't just any gaze. It was the kind that doesn't come from people. It came from the walls, the floorboards, the very breath of the house itself. I'd bought it from the Maddox heirs for less than a used pickup. They handed me the papers with shaking hands, eyes averted, like they were relieved to finally let it go. "It's yours now," one of them said without meeting my eyes. I didn't understand it then. I thought I'd scored a deal. Maybe it was just old family trauma, maybe superstition. But even now, I remember the way their grandmother whispered something in a language I couldn't place before she left the room. It didn't sound like a blessing. It's funny how things that should feel like a fresh start sometimes smell faintly of rot. The air inside the house was thick and stale, the way a sealed tomb must feel. The living room had a half-burned chandelier, a dusty piano with cracked keys, and a mirror that faced the wall, screwed in place like someone was scared of what it might reflect. The fireplace held ashes far too fresh for a place abandoned this long. That night, I didn't sleep. The wind outside didn't howl. It hummed, a low, guttural tone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. At exactly 3:13 a.m., the light in the upstairs hallway turned on. No electricity, no batteries, no reason. I froze. Then I heard it. A knock. 3 taps. Slow, precise, from inside the basement door. It wasn't fear that gripped me then. It was understanding. This house didn't want to be forgotten. And somehow, I knew. They hadn't paid me to remember it. They'd paid me to forget. It all started with a classified ad buried beneath layers of car sales and dog adoption listings. Historic property, cash buyer preferred. 1 acre, farmhouse included. As is, Maddox estate. It was the kind of ad you'd scroll past unless you were desperate, broke, or addicted to old houses and bad decisions. I was all three. The address led me 3 hours into the Arkansas backwoods, past shuttered gas stations, rusted-out swing sets, and forests so dense they looked like they hadn't been touched since before the Civil War. The Maddox place sat alone on a dirt road, surrounded by what used to be farmland, but now just looked like a graveyard of dead crops and wild weeds. No mailbox, no welcome mat, just a crooked private property sign with the paint peeling off like sunburned skin. I expected a realtor or maybe a lawyer, but instead, I was greeted by 3 people who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. 2 men and a woman, all in their 40s or 50s, dressed plainly and standing stiff as statues. They introduced themselves as the Maddox heirs, niece, nephew, and grandson of the last known occupant, Elijah Maddox. There was no handshake, no small talk, just silence. Then the woman cleared her throat and said, "We'll take 20. Calf, you can keep whatever's in it. 20,000 for a house that size?" It should have raised red flags. But I was too eager, too enchanted by the possibilities. I imagined restoring it, turning it into a bed and breakfast, or flipping it for triple. The land alone was worth more. Still, something about their expressions made me pause. Their eyes weren't hopeful. They were hollow, like they were begging me to say no. "I don't need to see inside first," I asked. "No," the older man replied, shaking his head slowly. "Best if you don't." I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. I signed the papers the same day. They'd already drawn them up, notarized and all. It was like they'd been waiting, not for a buyer, but for someone, anyone, who'd take the house off their hands. Right before leaving, the woman turned to me. "If anything happens," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "don't call us. We don't want it back." I laughed. She didn't. After they left, I stood alone in the field, keys in my hand, staring at the house. The windows were dark, but I swear I saw movement behind the curtains, like a slow parting of shadow and light. Probably just my imagination. Or maybe it was the wind catching the fabric. The front door was heavier than expected. I pushed it open, and the hinges screamed like something being torn apart. Dust erupted from the floor as I stepped in, and the scent hit me: old wood, mildew, something metallic underneath. The kind of smell that clings to your clothes long after you've left. The entryway had peeling floral wallpaper, a broken grandfather clock stuck at 2:19, and a staircase that coiled upward like a spine. Every step I took echoed as if the house were hollow. But the strangest part? It wasn't empty. There were plates still stacked in the cupboard. A coat still hung on the hook by the door. The piano had sheet music on the stand. Everything was paused, like whoever lived here had stepped out for a moment and just never returned. I walked into the parlor and noticed a painting on the wall. A portrait of a family: mother, father, 2 children, all dressed in black, all staring straight ahead. But their eyes looked too real, like they were painted last week, not 100 years ago. I leaned in to inspect the frame and found a small nameplate. The Maddox family, 1853. That's when I first felt it. The chill. Not cold air, but presence. Like standing in a room with someone who doesn't want you there. It prickled the back of my neck and made me turn around, expecting to see someone. No one. Just shadows curling at the edges of the room. Still, I convinced myself it was just nerves. A new place, a creepy setting, overactive imagination. I was logical, rational. This wasn't a horror movie. This was real life. So I unloaded my truck and moved in. By nightfall, the power was on thanks to a portable generator. I boiled water from a jug, made instant noodles, and tried to settle in. I set up a folding chair in the living room, cracked a beer, and raised it toward the fireplace like a toast. To fresh starts, I said out loud. Then I heard it again. 3 knocks. From the basement. Same cadence. Same exact pattern as before. This time, I didn't laugh. Because deep down, I knew the Maddox heirs had gotten off cheap. The knocking stopped the moment I stood up, like it had never happened at all. The silence afterward was heavier than sound, like the house was holding its breath. I waited for a second knock. None came. Still, my legs moved on their own, toward the kitchen, where the basement door stood like a scar in the wall. It was a thick wooden door, painted over too many times. The knob was brass, cold, slightly loose, and when I twisted it, it resisted, almost like the house didn't want to let me in. But it did. The hinges moaned as the door creaked open, revealing a staircase that fell away into blackness, steeper than I expected, as if descending into a throat. I grabbed my flashlight, tested its beam, and took the first step down. It smelled worse than the rest of the house. Damp earth, decaying wood, and something sharper, something animal. The air grew colder with each step, and the flashlight flickered once, then stabilized. The staircase groaned under my weight, but I made it to the bottom. The basement was massive, wider than the foundation should have allowed. The far corners disappeared into shadow, and the walls were stone, uneven and patched like a ruin. There were shelves lining the left wall, covered in dusty jars filled with unidentifiable contents. Some looked like pickled vegetables, others didn't. In the center stood an old workbench, cluttered with tools, cracked bottles, and something that looked like a ledger. I picked it up. The name burned across the cover. Elijah Maddox. I flipped through, and what I read stopped me cold. It wasn't financial notes or farming records. It was a log. Days and times. Notes scribbled beside them. Noise from below. She screamed again. Don't feed it after midnight. Still locked. Praise be. I shut the book, heart pounding. I swept my flashlight around again, And that's when I saw it. On the far wall, half hidden behind hanging tarps and broken crates, was another door. Steel, bolted, reinforced, with a series of locks that looked custom-made. And carved into the wood around the frame, in blackened, scorched script, were words I couldn't read. Another language? A warning? I took a step closer, and that's when I heard the noise. Not a knock this time. A groan. Deep, heavy, and wet, like lungs filling with water. Then something moved, just behind the steel door. I saw the shift in shadow, the flicker of motion. Not fast, but purposeful, like something had been resting and had just awakened. I backed up slowly, keeping my light on the door. The temperature in the room dropped instantly, my breath fogging in the beam. The groan came again, closer this time, as if the wall itself was breathing. Then silence. Then 3 knocks. Louder than before, more violent, like fists on a coffin lid. I ran. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut behind me, and threw the deadbolt. My heart was racing. Sweat slicked my neck despite the cold, and the silence that followed was deafening. Not even the wind outside, just the thump of my own heartbeat in my ears. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a raccoon trapped inside. Maybe the house had settled weird. Maybe I imagined it. That's what fear does, right? Plays tricks on you. Warps sound. Makes you see what isn't there. But no matter how many times I repeated that to myself, I couldn't shake the image of the door, those carvings, the sounds, the feeling in my chest that something in that house knew I was there now. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the flashlight in my lap. Every light in the house on, eyes fixed on the basement door. But it never moved. Nothing else happened. Until morning, when I finally worked up the nerve to leave the house and get some fresh air. I noticed something strange outside. Dirt, freshly turned, about 30 feet from the back porch. A rectangle of earth, clean and precise, like a shallow grave had been filled in. I approached it slowly. Kneeling, I brushed away some loose soil, expecting to find wood, maybe an old septic tank cover. Instead, I found bone. Just one, small, like a child's femur. I stumbled back, hands shaking. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't some haunted house cliché. It wasn't just creaks and groans and spooky portraits. This land, this house, this family, they'd buried something here. And not metaphorically. I took one more look at the basement door from the back window. I wasn't imagining it. Whatever the Maddox heirs had paid to forget wasn't gone. It was still here. The morning after discovering the buried bone behind the house, I drove into town. My hands trembled the whole ride. Every crack in the pavement felt like it echoed back from the past. I wasn't looking for a real estate lawyer or a contractor anymore. I needed answers. And if the Maddox family wouldn't give them, maybe the town would. Benton Hollow wasn't much to look at. 2 gas stations, a single diner, and a general store that also served as a post office. But small towns remember what they choose to forget. You can feel it in how the old folks pause when you say the wrong name, or how the air stills when your curiosity wanders too close to something buried. At the diner, I sat at the counter, ordered coffee and waited. Waited for someone to give me a thread. It came from a woman named Evelyn. Older, early 80s maybe, with trembling hands and eyes like storm glass. She sat down beside me with no warning and said, "You bought that place up on Crow's Hill, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. She looked down at her coffee and stirred it, not drinking. That house should have stayed empty. We prayed it would. That was all I needed. She didn't speak quickly or loudly. Everything she said felt like it cost her something, like pulling nails out of old wood. The Maddox family, she explained, was once considered royalty in Benton Hollow. Landowners, church builders. But behind that smiling facade was a darkness no one would speak of, until it bled into the town. "Children disappeared," she said softly. "Animals first, then kids, all between 1851 and 1855. My grandmother told me about it. Her brother vanished right from their porch. Just a pair of muddy footprints left behind, led back toward Crow's Hill. I asked why no one ever investigated, why no one tore that place down. Her hands trembled harder, because no one who entered that house ever came back the same, or didn't come back at all. The sheriff, a priest, a journalist from Little Rock. They tried, one by one, and each time, someone else vanished. She said it was the townspeople who begged the Maddox heirs to leave, not the other way around. That's when the family sold the property for next to nothing and swore they'd never set foot in Benton Hollow again. Paid cash to get out, paid to forget. But the house didn't forget, she added, almost whispering now. It remembers everyone who steps foot in it, and it doesn't like being disturbed. My stomach twisted. I told her about the journal, the steel door, the sounds in the basement. That's when she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "He's still down there, you know. Elijah. The last of them. They say he locked himself in, sealed the door with scripture and sin. But something else got sealed with him. The room felt colder. I couldn't tell if it was her words or the draft that always seems to follow truth in this town. I asked her if there was any record, newspaper clippings, police files, anything. She shook her head. No, the town buried it, just like they buried that child out back. It's better that way, but I needed to see for myself. If there was proof, any real documentation, I wanted it. I had to know what I was living above. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Aged, yellowed, brittle. "Take this," she said. "It's a letter from Reverend Tomlin. He was the last one to walk into that basement before Elijah disappeared. My mother saved it. Said it was too important to throw away, even if it cursed the house." I took it gently, like it might shatter. Back in the car, I opened it and read the scrawled, desperate handwriting. "I have sealed the door as instructed. Whatever lived beneath this house feeds on memory, on pain, and on blood. It mimics voices. It scratches inside dreams. Elijah believes he can hold it back, but I have seen its eyes. God help us. I will not return." That was the moment it clicked. The knocking wasn't random. The groans weren't just old house noises. Whatever was down there wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to communicate with me. I stared up at Crow's Hill from the highway. The trees bent unnaturally around the home, like they too wanted nothing to do with it. The windows stared back, lifeless and hungry. I had a choice now. Sell the place. Walk away. Pretend like I hadn't read that letter or seen that bone. But something inside me was shifting. Curiosity, fear, maybe even guilt. I didn't just want to know what was locked away. I needed to. I must have read that letter 10 times, and each time the words seemed to sink deeper into my chest like cold iron. Feeds on memory, on pain, and on blood. That wasn't the kind of metaphor a priest casually used. Reverend Tomlin had walked into the basement of this house, sealing a door, and someone, had convinced him never to return. I needed to find that door. The basement of the Maddox property wasn't accessible by the usual means. The old wooden stairs in the back hallway led only to a small root cellar, filled with cobwebs and rusted gardening tools. But the journal I'd found earlier, the one with Elijah Maddox's desperate scribbles, mentioned something different. A second door, hidden behind the walls. So I began tapping every inch of that root cellar, my knuckles going raw, listening for the hollow echo that would betray the secret. And finally, near the far left wall beneath the dusty shelving unit, I heard it. A soft thud. Different. Hollow. I pulled the shelving unit aside and saw it. A faint outline in the stone wall. Not a door exactly, but more like a sealed passage, covered in dried mud and faded chalk markings. A cross was faintly etched into the top corner. Beneath it, I could still make out scripture scratched by an unsteady hand. And lead us not into temptation. I retrieved a crowbar from the shed and began chipping away. The moment the seal cracked, a sharp metallic scent spilled out, like rust and rot stirred together in a cellar of forgotten air. I hesitated, but only for a breath. I had come this far. I had to see. Behind the wall was a narrow tunnel, not more than 5 feet high, leading downward. The air got colder with each step. The floor beneath me shifted from stone to dirt, uneven and soft, like it had been dug by hand. Then I saw the real door. It was made of old, reinforced timber, bolted with iron bands. A large wooden cross was nailed into its center, but it was upside down. It sent a chill down my spine. There were claw marks on the outside, not the inside. That told me more than I was ready to know. I reached for the handle, but it wasn't locked, just swollen with time, jammed shut by humidity and history. With some force, I managed to budge it open, and what greeted me was not the room I'd expected. It wasn't a dungeon or a chamber. It looked like a study. Books lined the walls, dozens of them, all coated in dust. The room was lit faintly by a single shaft of sunlight from a boarded-up window, and in the middle, a chair sat, facing a writing desk. And in that chair, slumped forward, was a man. His skeleton was intact. Clothing still clung to his frame, aged and brittle. A rosary hung from his fingers, and a leather-bound journal rested in his lap. I didn't have to guess. This was Elijah Maddox. I didn't move for a full minute, not out of fear, but awe. It wasn't the remains that terrified me. It was the walls. Every inch was covered in writings, scratched into the stone, onto the floorboards, the desk, even parts of the ceiling. Phrases repeated over and over again. Do not open it. It lies. Remember is the door. And then this. I buried it to silence the truth. But the truth will not die. Elijah had locked himself down here not to contain a demon. He was the container, the keeper. Whatever the entity was, it didn't just feed on pain. It fed on history, on what people forgot. That's why the heirs sold the property. Why the town erased the records. Forgetting wasn't just avoidance. It was survival. And now, I had remembered it all. As I moved closer to the desk, I noticed something else. Beneath the skeleton's feet, etched into the wood, was a map. Not of the property, but beneath it, tunnels, chambers, hidden vaults, and one line drawn in blood, leading to something labeled only as the root. I took a photo of the map, not because I planned to follow it yet, but because something told me, once I left this room, I'd start forgetting too. As I turned to leave, the temperature in the tunnel dropped. Not just cold, freezing. And then I heard it. A whisper. Not from behind the door, but from inside my head. Do you see me now? I ran. I didn't even close the door behind me. I just ran until I burst into the sunlight, panting and shaking and caked in dirt. The Maddox house stared down at me from the hill, silent, unmoved. But I felt it, that whatever had been locked beneath it for over a century, knew my name now. I didn't go back down to the tunnel for days. My mind needed air, reality, noise. Anything to keep me from listening to the silence that had followed me out of that room. But the more I tried to return to normal life, the more abnormal everything around me became. It started with the photos. I had taken a picture of Elijah's map, clear as day, with my phone. But now, the image was gone, replaced with a grainy black screen. Just static, like an old TV. Every time I tried to open it, the app crashed. I even plugged my phone into the computer. Same result. Corrupted. Just gone. Then the headaches started. They weren't normal headaches. They came at exactly 3:11 a.m., sharp and sudden. A piercing pressure behind the eyes, accompanied by the same 3 whispered words. Every night, same voice. Follow the route. I chalked it up to stress, trauma, hallucination. But deep down, I knew what it really was. I wasn't supposed to leave that door open. The town noticed too. The postman, Mr. Carter, who delivered mail to the Maddox house for 27 years, refused to set foot near it. When I asked why, he just said, "That place eats memories. Always has." Then he crossed himself and walked off, refusing to deliver my packages again. People started avoiding me in town. At the diner, they'd stop talking when I walked in. Conversations fell quiet. Eyes narrowed. Whispers behind menus. The librarian, who had once helped me dig through the property records, now pretended she didn't know who I was. It was as if I was carrying something with me, and they could sense it. But the worst part? It wasn't just them forgetting. I was forgetting too. One morning, I couldn't remember what my parents looked like. I stared at an old photo of us at a lake, and their faces looked hazy, smudged, like someone had wiped their features clean with a thumb. Names started slipping. Important dates. Phone numbers. That's when I knew. This wasn't haunting. This was erasure. So I did what I always do when answers disappear. I went back to the basement. Only this time, I didn't go alone. I brought Janice, a local historian I'd met during my research. She had always been skeptical of the Maddox legends, but after I showed her Elijah's journal and the priest's letter, she agreed to help me investigate what lay beneath the house. She carried a flashlight, a notebook, and a stubborn belief in logic. We returned to the sealed chamber. The air still metallic, still thick. Elijah's remains were still seated, untouched. But this time, we paid attention to the map beneath his feet. Janice photographed it with an old Polaroid. No electronics. The photo came out fine. From there, we began tracing the lines, physically mapping the underground. We spent days studying the property blueprints, overlaying them with the map. And what we discovered chilled me deeper than anything yet. The tunnels didn't just run beneath the Maddox house. They extended beneath half the town. The church, the elementary school, even the cemetery. Whatever had been buried, it hadn't been contained. It had been spread, allowed to grow silently beneath people's feet, feeding on the very fabric of memory, eroding time itself. And now, as we sat in my study surrounded by torn maps and flickering candles, Janice looked at me and asked a question that felt like a verdict. What if the town isn't decaying by chance? What if forgetting is how this thing protects itself? That made too much sense. The lost records, the erased history, the selective memory of the townsfolk. This entity, this root, it didn't want to be remembered. Memory was a threat to it. The more people remembered the truth, the weaker it became. So it infected forgetfulness like a virus. Janice said she wanted to document everything, publish it, expose it. But she never got the chance. Because the next morning, she vanished. Her house was empty, all belongings gone. No signs of struggle, no police report filed. And when I asked around, no one in town could remember who she was. I checked my phone. Her contact? Gone. Her messages? Blank. Her photo in the group picture at the town's historical society? She wasn't in it. I was standing beside no one. I held my head in my hands, panic setting in. I wasn't just losing memories. I was losing witnesses. The more truth I uncovered, the faster the erasure crept in. That night, I sat alone in the Maddox library, staring at the old fireplace. I realized something horrifying. If the entity fed on forgotten truths, and it grew stronger the more we denied them, Then I had become its greatest threat. By remembering, by researching, by exposing the past, I was painting a target on myself, and I felt it watching, not from the shadows, from within. Something had been awakened, and it remembered me back. After Janice vanished, I stopped sleeping. It wasn't insomnia in the normal sense. It was fear, a deeper, more primal dread. I knew that if I closed my eyes too long, I might forget who I was. I might wake up in a house I didn't recognize, with memories that didn't belong to me. Or worse, I might wake up erased like Janice. So I lit every candle I could find in the Maddox house. I turned on every lamp, even ones with frayed cords and buzzing filaments. I stayed in motion, pacing the creaky floors like a prisoner watching the sea for signs of rescue that would never come. Then one night, just after 2 a.m., I heard it again. The sound. Not footsteps, not whispers, but a long, low groan from behind the eastern library wall. A sound like timber giving way under the weight of time. Or breath. The house was groaning. I followed it, slowly, flashlight in hand. The eastern library wall was covered in floor-to-ceiling shelves. But something about the air behind the middle shelf felt wrong. Stale. Dead. So I pulled at it. And to my disbelief, the whole shelf shifted with a sigh. Behind it was a hidden doorway, narrow, walled in with cobwebs, old lath and plaster crumbling at the edges. And behind it, stairs, wooden, steep, winding downward in a tight spiral that made my chest compress with every step. There was no light down there. My flashlight began to flicker again. But I went anyway. The staircase ended in a rectangular room, stone walls, earth floor, and at the center, a large wooden desk with something covered in burlap. The air smelled like mildew, rot, and rusted paper. The kind of smell that stains your memories. I removed the burlap carefully. Beneath it were stacks of sealed letters, each addressed in looping black ink to names I didn't recognize. And each envelope bore the same wax seal, an emblem I had only ever seen once before, carved above the Maddox family fireplace. I opened one. The letter inside was dated November 1884 and signed by Abigail Maddox. It was a confession. She spoke of voices under the floorboards, of shadows stretching longer than the sun should allow, and of a black root that feeds on guilt. She wrote of how her husband had found something in the soil during a renovation, a stone box locked from the inside. They had opened it, and after that day, the town began to change. First the crops failed, then children began forgetting their own names. The preacher at the time, Father Healy, held exorcisms, but Abigail claimed that the thing they unleashed couldn't be banished because it wasn't in the house anymore. It was beneath everything. It moved through the soil, through the water table. It was memory rot, time mold. Abigail's letter ended with a chilling statement. We sealed it the best we could, with sacrifice, with silence. But you can't bury what remembers how to rise. There were dozens more letters, each from a different Maddox heir or town official, spanning generations, all trying to explain their version of the horror, and all eventually confessing to one thing. They were paid to forget. Each Maddox heir, upon coming of age, was given the deed to the house and a ledger of payments, a kind of bribe to maintain silence and uphold the illusion of a cursed but harmless family legacy. If they refused, they vanished. If they spoke, they were erased. One envelope stood out. It was addressed simply, "To the last one who dares to remember." It was dated 1911, unsigned. The contents? Just a map. A new one, more detailed than Elijah's, showing not only the tunnels, but nodes, points of activity, places where the root had broken through the surface across decades. And one node was marked with a red X. My bedroom. I dropped the letter. My flashlight gave one final flicker and went black. I stood there in total darkness, the sound of breathing not my own pressing in from the walls. But it wasn't malevolent. It was curious, like it was trying to study me. A test, maybe, to see if I'd run. But I didn't. I took the map, the letters, and climbed back upstairs. I lit the fireplace. I sat with every confession, every name, every memory someone had tried to burn out of history, and I wrote them down again. I started a journal, my own confession, one that couldn't be erased because it would be told aloud, shared, given, because now I knew the truth. The entity didn't fear fire or crosses or salt. It feared memory, stories, truths spoken aloud, the things that bind people together in defiance of silence. And as I finished writing that first sentence, something in the house shifted again, not violently, but gently, as if something had just let go, or maybe just took notice. I closed the journal, heart pounding, and whispered to the dark, I remember. The house creaked, not in protest, but like it understood. After that night, the house was quiet, not empty but still, like it had finished watching me and turned inward to rest. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. There was one thing left I couldn't ignore. The town. Because if the Maddox family had paid to forget, who else had? I drove into town that morning with the map folded tight in my coat. The sky was low and gray, pressing against the rooftops like a lid. And as I passed the corner diner, the post office, the crumbling church with its sagging steeple, I began to see them differently. Like old photos you suddenly notice are missing people. I stopped at the library. Miss Delaney, the head librarian, was ancient. White hair pulled tight in a bun, glasses dangling from a pearl chain. She had been working there since before color televisions were a thing. She smiled when I walked in, but when I asked about the Maddox family archives, that smile faltered. Oh dear, she said softly. That section's been closed for decades. Mold, I think. Mold. The same word Abigail Maddox had used in 1884. I asked if I could see it anyway. To my surprise, Miss Delaney hesitated, then nodded. But just you. And don't go moving anything. She led me to a basement door behind the microfilm machines, unlocked it with a brass key from around her neck, and pointed down a set of stone stairs. The basement smelled like wet paper and varnish. I found the archives behind a wire mesh cage. Inside were old boxes, some collapsing under their own age. And tucked in the far back was a black leather ledger with the name Elias Maddox engraved in gold. The ledger was full of payments to town officials, land surveyors, coroners, all dated around the same periods as the letters, each one carefully marked confidential, silence fund. There were even signatures. I saw the mayor's name, the sheriff's, even Miss Delaney's. But that wasn't what broke me. At the very back of the book, there was a child's drawing. Stick figures, a tall house, a black root drawn in crayon stretching out from its basement like a spider's legs. And in the corner, scrawled in a shaky hand, "Don't let it eat Grandma again." No signature, just the date, 1956. I left the library shaking. Back at the diner, I asked old Mr. Langley, who'd lived here since before sidewalks, if he remembered the Maddox family. His face went blank. Maddox. I pressed further. He stared for a moment, then said, "That name sounds like a cough. I don't think anyone ever lived in that house, son." He took a sip of coffee and blinked, then asked me again, "You say you're just passing through?" They didn't remember. Not really. Bits and pieces maybe. A shape in a mirror. A chill near a certain fence. But no one remembered the house, the heirs, the history, because they'd been made to forget. Maybe not by money, but by something deeper, something older. That night, I drove to the edge of town where the soil started to harden and the trees grew thin like ribs. One of the nodes from the map was out there. I parked near a collapsed barn, followed the lines from the journal until I found it. Just a patch of earth, but it hummed. I knelt down, pressed my hand into the dirt, and said, "I know what you are now." Nothing happened. At first. Then a whisper. Not a word. A sensation. Not language, but recognition. Like a pulse shared between memory and earth. I understood. This wasn't about haunting. It was about hiding. This thing, it didn't crave fear. It craved forgetfulness. Oblivion. Every memory you buried was food to it. Every untold story a feast. Silence was its shelter. Secrets were its sanctuary. That's why the Maddox family didn't survive. They obeyed it. They kept it secret. But I had written everything down. I had spoken names aloud. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just a survivor. I was a threat. To it. To the thing that lived beneath the Maddox land. Because I remembered. And I would make others remember. As I stood up, the ground trembled softly, like a sigh from the deep. Not in warning. Not in wrath. But in reverence. Because no one had ever defied it this way before. Not with fire. Not with steel. But with story. And story, it turns out, is the one thing you can't bury for long. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but because I was copying everything. Every letter, every map, every journal page I had taken from the Maddox property. I scanned them all, then printed them out again and again. 5 full sets. I sealed each one into manila envelopes, labeled with only a number and a short phrase on the front. If I disappear, read this. Then I mailed them. One to a historian at the University of Arkansas. One to a true crime blogger who specialized in cold cases. One to a retired military man who ran a conspiracy podcast. One to a former priest turned folklore archivist. And one, just one, to a journalist in Little Rock who had once written about chemical dumping in rural counties, and who'd nearly been killed for it. Each of them would receive the full story, all the evidence, every horrifying truth I'd gathered. But I kept the originals. I drove back to the Maddox property just before dawn, while the air was still heavy with mist and the grass shimmered like glass. It felt like stepping onto the surface of a memory, fragile, dangerous, alive. The house was gone. Completely. No foundation, no rubble, not even scorched earth. Just soft, untouched field. Birds chirped above like nothing had ever been wrong here. I dropped to my knees, not in grief, in awe, because this confirmed it. The entity, whatever ancient consciousness lived beneath this land, it hadn't just consumed memory. It had corrected reality, smoothed it like a wrinkle in a bedsheet, rewritten the present. But it had made one mistake. I was still here, and so were the copies. I turned around and found a strange sight. The willow tree that once bent toward the house was now upright, vibrant, its leaves shining silver in the early sun. Tied to one of its branches was a red string, thin and trembling. At the end of the string was a key, small brass unmarked. I didn't take it. Instead, I took a photo, because that's the one rule I had come to live by. Don't touch what invites you in silence. I walked back to my car, but before leaving, I carved one word into the bark of the willow. Remember. Not for myself, for the next person, because this thing didn't need to be fought with bullets or books. It needed to be exposed. It needed to be remembered. And now, no matter what happened to me, the story would spread, not as a warning, not as a legend, but as a reckoning. The story was out. The files went public 2 weeks after I mailed them. At first, no one paid attention, just another eerie tale on a blog post, another thread in a forum full of skeptics. But then the interviews started. The historian validated the document's age. The retired priest found matching patterns in forgotten folklore from the 1800s. And the journalist? He dug up missing person reports tied to the Maddox land. Cases long buried under bureaucratic dust and family bribes. The story grew legs. But so did something else. People began reporting dreams. Nightmares, really. All describing a door. A heavy wooden door with a brass knob, buried under roots and gravel, glowing faintly red in moonlight. In every account, someone whispers from behind it. I remember you. They were people who had never met me, never seen the house, never heard the name Maddox before that week. I stayed quiet, moved far away, burned every last thing I hadn't mailed. But the dreams kept coming, for others. Sometimes I wonder if I triggered it all, if sharing the truth didn't set anyone free, but simply invited more people in. Maybe the house didn't vanish. Maybe it moved. A month ago, I received a letter. No return address, just one line inside. We paid to forget. You made them remember. Taped beneath it was a photo of the willow tree, still standing. Still holding the key, still waiting. I burned the letter, but not the message. Some secrets don't stay buried. Some houses don't die. And some doors are still knocking.